All right. So welcome everyone to this Better Together session. My name is Juan Carlos Lopez. I'm coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the city territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I am at Acadia University. The, when I say this, I just want to acknowledge that this is my compromise to listen and listen and listen. And like my dear colleague always says, when you are done listening, go ahead and listen and listen and listen some more so that we learn. And the reason for learning, my compromise for learning, is that I want to learn what has happened, what happened in the past, so that we can think about the future and move in the future uh, uh, with decolonization and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. I would also like to acknowledge that that these lands where I'm an immigrant and a settler have been received different waves of people of African descent. The record is more than 400 years old. And I also say that because I want to listen and learn what have happened, and with the hopes of creating a better future for everyone. So that is why I do this. So today is, I don't know if I mentioned my name. My name is Juan Carlos Lopez, and I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Maple League of Universities. So today we have the honor of having Dr. Vivian Valencia join us. Dr. Vivian Valencia, I'm just going to say that she's a Canada Research Chair in Sustainable Agriculture and Climate Action, working at Bishops right now. And I'm going to let Dr. Valencia take the stage, and do her presentation and and introduce herself. So thank you, Vivian, for joining us. I will mute myself, and I have an eye on the chat and all those things. I'm in the background here if you need my assistance.
Yes, thank you very much, Juan Carlos, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Vivian Valencia, and I'm the Research Chair of Sustainable Agriculture and Climate Action, as Juan Carlos introduced. And today I'm going to share my screen already so that we can look at this together and make sure that it works. So okay, everything's good. Okay, so today I wanted to talk to you about nurturing hope and action and empowering students through lighthouses and climate action. And what I mean is basically, I want to show you today a few of the things that I have done in my classes to try to counteract a little bit the eco-anxiety and eco-grief that I see that our students are increasingly suffering. Many of my students have told me that they're very concerned about the state of the planet, their futures, and they feel very disheartened and not very encouraged, because many of this, the reports that we see from the IPCC, the information we read on the news, it all points at a future that doesn't look very bright, and that it seems that many of our actions have already transgressed many planetary boundaries, and it feels that a lot of the damage is irreversible. So when you feel that something is irreversible, then what can you do? Then, I mean, that is certainly a very depressing situation to be in. So I mean, I'll start by telling you a little bit about me, my motivation, so that you also understand where I'm coming from and how I'm addressing these issues through my teaching and my research. Then I'll introduce the concept of lighthouses, which is not a term that I necessarily invented, but I'll share a little bit about it and how it has brought hope and a positive light to my research and my interactions with students. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how I structure my pedagogy so that it's future and practice oriented. And I'll tell you a little bit also about what I mean by that. And I'll give you two examples from two of my classes. One is called Lighthouse Farms for Sustainable Future, and the second one is a climate change and agriculture course that I teach. And I'll give you an example through two of the group projects that I designed The second one, both of them are quite experimental, and it was we were both all learning together. So I'll share a little bit about that. Maybe can inspire you, or maybe you do similar things. I'd love to connect with all of you in the audience during the discussion question to see how this resonates with you, and what are you doing from your angle in whatever position you hold. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm a trained ecologist, so my PhD is in ecology. But since very early on, my interest has always been in the intersection of nature and people. So my PhD work took me to the highlands of Chiapas, where I was in remote forest where people live. So where you have the tension of communities who are there and need to make a living, and they live off the forest, and the tension with conserving this forest, because these are some of the remaining forests where we find some of the last specimens of so many species. So there I went to study coffee agroforestry systems, and I wanted to investigate the potential of agroforestry systems in meeting kind of these two tensions of providing a livelihood, but also being a place of conservation. So that took me to hiking in the middle of the forest, but also, yeah, to very remote areas, hard to reach, but also to talking to farmers and trying to understand people and what people do, what they do, what their motivations are. And this, of course, starts to show you that things are a bit more complicated and also complex than what one may think, and that you really need to understand the different actors and the different people involved if you really want to solve a problem. So this is where my I guess love or desire to focus on interdisciplinary work started. Especially I focus on sustainability issues, so you really need to bring both the social and the ecological together to understand the issues, the elements, and start getting at the potential solutions. Besides my work as a researcher in the field, I have also engaged in the policy arena with diplomats and in different global settings. Here I'm leading a fishbowl on discussing the gaps between policy making and climate change, and why does climate change, all the knowledge and information and science that we have, why is it not reflected sometimes in the policy, and what's the gap? So that was a very interesting fishbowl, where one of the key learnings that I had is when one of the policymakers said, "You scientists don't understand our work." So happy to discuss that further. And this is just an example of some of the times I've spent in my life that have taken me to different government and policy settings, because I also want to understand how my work can better inform policymakers and how I can understand what policymakers do, so that then I can best target and do things so that they're useful for those that make decisions. And I'm also a mother of 2 kids, and I also try to, do all those things at the same time. So my motivation, so my background is in food systems, and when I talk about sustainability issues and my interest in sustainability issues is through food and through agricultural systems. And I can say that, if I can summarize how our food systems are failing us, I would say that is through 3 key ways. One of them is they're the main drivers of biodiversity loss. They're also a key driver of climate change. 30% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. So that's a significant factor leading to global warming. But they're also key in perpetuating social inequities, power imbalances that lead to the accumulation of power and benefits in the hands of a very few, to the detriment of the many, many, many people that work in the food system. So food systems are at the intersection of all these key issues. So they're part of the problem, but that also means they're part of the solution. And nowadays you will hear so many different governance units like the UN and large nonprofits and large organizations. They're all starting to talk about, we need a food systems transformation. So if you Google food systems transformation, you'll find so many reports and resources that has exploded in the last few years. It was finally reflected in the last COP, where food systems finally had a central stage in climate change negotiations and discussions. How did this not happen before, being that they're responsible for a chunk of greenhouse gases, but well, it's happening now. So my research and teaching are motivated by finding solutions to transform our food systems towards systems that are sustainable, fair, and equitable. That is kind of like my North Star. And I focus on the processes, mechanisms, and strategies that can facilitate a shift from the less sustainable state that we are to more sustainable food systems. And I do this in my research, but I also use my teaching as a place to investigate this. So a lot of what I do in my classes, it's ways for me also to experiment or investigate new methods and new ideas, and I do it with my students. So I make the point that I'm also learning in my own classes. And how do I connect with this, with teaching? Well, I think that one of my main jobs is to prepare the future or next generation of leaders and decision makers. Everyone that's sitting in my classes 20 years from now will be CEOs, someone's manager, someone's boss. They will be making decisions. So if we can make sure that they make better decisions than my generation did, then perhaps we can, move things to a better place. So that's one thing. So I want to equip them with concepts and tools to address sustainability issues. The sustainability issues, as I was saying, they're interdisciplinary. So I want my students to leave my classes and walk out with their degree, being able to pull from different disciplines and different concepts, because they will not, and we will not solve the issues we have with just disciplinary perspectives or just silos. So while we can take classes in many disciplines, in the end, we need to be able to bring it all together. And that's part of what I try to teach them. So interdisciplinary training. I also try to draw from complex systems and try to understand how we can use complex systems as an analysis tool and a way to understand. I come from the food system, but a lot of what I'm teaching my students in reality can be applied to many other sustainability issues. And I also like to, in my classes, create a space to discuss and engage with alternative futures. So again, students come with this. I mean, we all in our society, when we think of the future, again, it's not the brightest thing, but can we imagine better futures? What could better futures look like? So I want students to also have that space to engage with alternative ideas for the future. And I do this a lot through showcasing positive examples, which is what I call lighthouses. I also call them pockets of the future in the present. So the more desirable future that we want is already here in the form of these positive examples, in the form of these lighthouses. So if we can find these lighthouses and help them grow and amplify their societal impact, we can have or help that future we want grow out of those examples. And then I also like to create the space for students to apply that knowledge, so for practice, but also for action and for them to actually do something, which is something new that I did this semester in my climate change class. So maybe just to tell you a little bit about what are lighthouses, what are Lighthouse Farms and food systems initiatives. So one of the ways we're describing lighthouses is as farms and initiatives in the value chain that are successful exemplars of sustainable and just futures that transcend the constraints of conventional agriculture. So in a way, they are challenging the status quo, they're challenging the industrial way of farming, and they're showing that there are other ways in which we can grow our food, not just from a biophysical and production perspective, but also from marketing. Many of these initiatives are experimenting or doing different ways of connecting with consumers, and they also have their own philosophies and so on. So it's also, again, about like justice and equity and not just the environmental sustainability of the food system. And these lighthouses are extraordinary because they operate in ways that reduce ecological footprint, improve biodiversity conservation, regenerate water, air, soil, and use ecological processes, and again, integrate gender equity and social justice in terms of food distribution and access. So these were some of the kind of like the broad criteria or definitions that we have been using for lighthouses, but I'll tell you this in a few slides, but we have further refined the term of lighthouse. And I did this with my students. So why look at lighthouses? So one, what can we learn from these extraordinary cases? How can they give us guidance for the future? So again, this idea of pockets of the future in the present, and how can this become growth points? So that's part of what I do in my research, but I also bring in these ideas and these concepts into my teaching. And maybe just to give you a little bit more background or more ideas on lighthouses. So like I said, I did not invent this idea of lighthouses. Actually, it dates back earlier to the 60s in public health, the idea of positive deviance or positive deviance, outliers, positive outliers was already used. And it was identified to be a way to help solve very complex problems by learning from the people who had already succeeded in addressing whatever challenge or problem. So to be more specific, so from using again the lens of public health and people who were studying things like undernutrition or child malnutrition and so on, the rationale comes that in every community there are certain individuals or groups or organizations who have either unique strategies or behaviors that enable them to adopt better solutions that their neighbors, while having access to the same or fewer resources, have not adopted. So in other words, within the community, there are already successful solutions. So rather than coming with outside interventions and coming in with new technologies that we developed in a lab or somewhere else, why don't we go to the communities and the ground and the local level and figure out and discover what's already working there? What are people already pioneering? Because they're facing problems and they're looking for solutions as well. So what can we learn from the solutions that already exist? So the typical example is this example from Vietnam in the 90s, that despite many interventions, malnutrition continues. So while the intervention was in place, malnutrition rates among children would decrease, but as soon as the intervention stopped, the situation reverted to what it was before. So in other words, it was not sustainable, whatever they were doing. So then they decided to, change around what they were doing and bring in another framework. And what they did now was to start focusing on those families whose children were not malnourished. And these families were considered positive deviants. And then they went on to try to understand, okay, what are these families doing differently that their children are not malnourished, despite being in exactly the same context, socioeconomic and so on, than the other families. And what they discovered is that these families were supplementing their children's meal with tiny shrimp, crab, and fish from the paddy fields. And that the other families were not necessarily doing this because this was a bit of a taboo or not considered to be appropriate. But at least you're finding here a solution that is sustainable, that other families were trying. And yes, there are challenges, like, for example, the fact that it's a taboo, but it's easier to work with that challenge than, that's what they were doing originally, which was to come up with outside interventions that were not sustainable. So in short, this idea of positive deviance, they're also called bright spots, lighthouses, they come with so many terms, but the idea is to shift from just problem solving to solution oriented, and also to the idea that the solutions exist and that we need to find them, identify them, and then figure out how to make them grow. So how have I brought this to my classes? So the first course that I taught when I started at Bishop's University in almost a year and a half ago was this course that I call Lighthouse Farms for Sustainable Future. And basically what I did were a few things. The first thing is I wanted to equip students with new ways of understanding the world, but also the theories and the concepts for doing this. So for this, I introduced them to the multi-level perspective theory, and you can see the graphical representation of this theory on the right, and don't worry about figuring out all the arrows and all the colors. But the point is that this theory is one of the theories that allows us to start understanding how systems change. And it was developed by historians who were, historians had the luxury of studying things that are complete. So they were studying processes of change that had already taken place. Like, for example, how did we go from carriages pulled by horses to a society that's dominated by cars? Or how did we go from sail ships to steamboats? So this kind of like broad changes. So by looking at many of these examples, they were able to come up with these theories of change. And the interesting thing is that in all these cases, change came from the periphery. So those are your green arrows, then the niche that is challenging the status quo, which is in red. and eventually something happens and they're able to shift everything. So this links to the idea of lighthouses, because lighthouses are basically everything that's happening in your niche. It's all these green arrows. So then it connects with those ideas, and it shows you a theoretical way in which all these things that are happening in the periphery do have a meaning and do have a power to change things. So it's not just me trying to be positive. It is actually shown, and there are theories to help us understand how those changes happen. And again, because many of these ideas are a bit dense, it takes some time to, you have to chew on it, to digest it. So I also embedded a lot of discussion time in which students could sit in a 20-minute discussion with a group of students. And for example, here you have an example of some of the questions that they would have to go through, to give them also the opportunity for peer learning, because sometimes it sinks better, you may understand it better if it's your peer explaining it than the professor. So I embedded a lot of these deep discussions to work through some of these concepts and theories that may have been a little bit heavier. Then going to the practice, so we have the theory, the broad concepts, but okay, the practice, how do we operationalize this? How do we go about this? So for that, I showed students the 3 Horizons framework. And this actually changed many students. I have many students who now talk in terms of H1, H2, H3, became part of their everyday vocabulary. And the 3 Horizons is a good counterpart to the multi-level perspective theory. It's a way kind of like to operationalize it. H1 is your status quo, the dominant system. H3 is your desired future, which that actually is not in the multi-level perspective theory. That's just to look at things that happen. It's not normative. But here we introduce the normative aspect of what is the future that we desire. And then I introduced this framework, and also I created a group assignment that took place throughout the entire semester that was based on this logic of the 3 Horizons, because the 3 Horizons is also a facilitation methodology that includes many reflection questions and many steps to help participants reflect from where are we, the H1, to where do we want to go and what needs to change, which is kind of your H2, and where your lighthouses or your niche comes in, because your H2 is and that disruption and those things that are happening that challenge the H1 and eventually transition to your desired future or your H3. So I introduced this framework, and again, I matched it with this with this group assignment in which they had 6 steps, I believe, that were distributed throughout the course, in which they had to meet with their groups, they had to choose a case, then analyze the status quo, identify the stakeholders, imagine their vision. So what's the desired vision for that system or that case study that they selected? Identify the gaps, and then the very last step is what are the potential solutions. So this is also challenging because many students start from day one with the solutions. And then I tell them one thing is to be solutions oriented, and another thing is to jump to solutions. And we want to avoid that because it is really important to understand the problem, the gaps, the actors, why are where we are. And once you've spent 90% of your time looking at the problem, then let's look at what are potential solutions. And what was nice about this exercise is that it called for their imagination and their creativity, both in imagining the vision for the future, but also in proposing solutions, which is something that I try to also bring in my classes. As a student, I remember never having to be creative or use my imagination. Like university became about learning things and answering questions in a test. And I felt like that actually undermined my creativity. So I'm trying to bring in aspects that actually draw on students' imagination and creativity, which is obviously so important for problem solving. So this is one example of one of the projects that came out. So one of the groups wanted to focus on food sovereignty in Nunavik, and their final product, because they had also it was like an open space, like they could do whatever they want to, could do via presentation or anything. So they chose a podcast, and they created this podcast that was very well curated, in which they created characters, and they brought in all the aspects that they had to bring in, like talk about the status quo, the actors, the gaps, and all that in this conversation style. They also, part of the assignment was to show, to refer to some of the concepts and, use this as an opportunity to showcase that they had been learning. So this was really nice, the podcast that they created. It was very surprising. and also it called on their creativity for planning this. Another group, for example, focused on mushrooms and the fact that there's very low mushroom diversity and that mushroom production is dominated by other regions. So that was the issue they wanted to address. How could we have a more diverse mushroom production that is also happening in Quebec and that is also by the local farmers and in a sustainable way? So when they envisioned their future, they saw a festival. So here you can see the flyer for the festival. So they created this festival in which people would be sharing recipes. All the different producers would be showcasing the different mushrooms. There would be panel discussions and all those things. And they also brought in samples of the different diversity of mushrooms. They brew mushrooms. So we had a mushroom drink, a mushroom risotto and all that. And they even created T-shirts, which is what they're showing us here from their festival. So again, like these groups went beyond anything that I could have expected. And I believe that's just because I created a space that had some structure, but also had many space or a lot of room for them to do whatever they wanted. And then, of course, other groups just did a poster presentation and so on, which was the standard expectation, but the ones that wanted and when inspired did more than that. Then a few of these students were really engaged and wanted to continue learning and knowing more about lighthouses. So I created an experiential learning course with 4 students. And then and also with Professor Brian Dale. And we further developed the concept of lighthouse, which the initial definition is the one I gave you at the beginning, but we felt that we needed to work more through the criteria and the definition and so on. Then we started identifying lighthouse farmers in the region and we started interviewing them. And when I say we, it's them. Like the students are the ones that led this out of their own engagement and so on. And they even created this figure. So they wrote the text to the right and they created this figure in which captures the idea of lighthouse rooted on the concept of food sovereignty. And again, this is for me, it's what happens when you give students a space for them to flourish, right? Like with sufficient structure, but also sufficient freedom for them to just do things differently or in whichever way they want to express themselves. I also want to give you an example from my climate change class. So in my climate change class, I developed this climate action project. So as I was developing the course, because these are courses that I have taught only for the first time, so I had to design them from scratch, which is, as you know, a lot of work. So when I was designing this course, I had in mind all the time that my students were noticing, complaining, highlighting how there's all this diversity of actors that are not doing enough. Politicians are not doing enough. The private sector is not doing enough. Our representatives are not doing enough. So there's this sense that there's not enough action. So I said, okay, what action can you take? And then I created this space for them to actually take action and actually do something about things, because university tends perhaps to be a place where students end up being mostly passive and recipients of information. So how about they do something? So I created this list of potential action projects. I did some research beforehand of what could be interesting projects. Then I consulted with Lawrence Williams at the Sustainability Development Office, because they themselves are also leading many projects. So I thought, okay, maybe this is also an opportunity to collaborate with them and join forces. So some of these projects that you see listed here are either projects that were already actively being led by the Sustainability Office, or were in their pipeline as something they wanted to do, but they hadn't gotten to because, you know, like they would need more people, or were new, but they were more than willing to support. So this was very nice to do it with them, because then the students also had a partner of someone who could provide them with insights on, okay, what's the status of this? What has been done? What could be done? Who to talk to? And okay, so how did I guide students? So I provided some resources and links. So from the 11 projects, I did have a preliminary research so that they would have a starting point of links towards, I don't know, maybe other universities who had done Meatless Monday or other resources or scientific articles or anything I thought that could get them started. I told them all to meet at least one with the Sustainability Development Office to understand what had been done regarding their project and also to get a bit of guidance of what could be done. And I also gave them examples of what could this look like, because actually I had no clue. This is an experiment again, like I had no clue really how this could materialize, but I brainstormed and I thought, okay, this could look like writing a letter. So the activities that they would undertake as part of the project, right? Like writing letters, sending emails, making phone calls, talking to diverse actors, making posters, campaigns, creating social media content. I mean, like those are all the things that they could do. And yeah, so I just try to brainstorm to give them some examples of what is it that, you know, an expectation of what could be happening. And then what do I expect? So where the course is not over, in about 2 weeks, students will present. So I do not expect projects to be finalized. So many of these actions, of course, will take months or years, depending on the type of change, but some are more contained. So the focus is not necessarily on the final outcome, but rather first on the scientific evidence. So I want them to show to me why their chosen action is meaningful and to show the science behind it. And then that links, of course, with, you know, the course being a course on climate change and agriculture. So they have to draw from that science. They have to show the process, so what they did, and at least some sort of small victories, right? And so yes, so again, the motivation for this was to change students from this passive role to become active members and to learn while they were doing things and to do something meaningful. And it was also the opportunity to deepen their knowledge about the science, because in all these exchanges that they had to undergo with different actors, they had to justify it. So I encouraged them to justify them using the science, because again, that's what I'm teaching them, among many things, but also to justify and to push for the things they wanted to see by showing examples of others that have done. So this also connects to the idea of lighthouses. As I'll tell you in the next slide, like many of the students hit walls, like this cannot be done type of responses. And to that I said, you have to show them that it has been done, because many people will always think that things cannot be better because it has not been done. So to those people, sometimes you show them the examples where it was done and it was successful, to show them that it is possible. Again, so what were some of the key challenges and learning? So this was a very interesting exercise also for me, because one of the key things that became evident at the beginning and the middle of the project is who holds the power to change things. Like, who should we be talking to? Are we talking to the right person? Should we be asking to talk to someone else? Like in many cases, they were talking to people who were not so open to the ideas that they were implementing, like having a meatless Monday in the cafeteria or making the cafeteria menu more plant-based or in season, or making sure that there are no disposable cups at the gate or things like that. Those were the type of projects. Sometimes the gate is the bar on campus. So sometimes they were talking to people who were saying, no, that's not possible, or that wouldn't work. Like, students want one meatless Monday. So the first questions, or some of the questions that started to come up, is, are we talking to the right person? Like, who has the power to change things? And how do we deal with someone who's saying, no, this is not possible? Like, do we keep pushing? To what extent do we leave people uncomfortable? Some students were worried about, stepping on people's toes, or making very uncomfortable certain people. So they were also, discovering what this fine line between pushing forward for something and stopping, and who to talk to. And also dealing with the immunity to change, with is anything, like something that you'll always deal with when you're trying to change the system. There are people who are comfortable in the way things are and who don't see the need for change, or who see the change to be too difficult. So they were also dealing with that. And like some of the responses they would get were frustrating. Like, for example, why can we not keep using glass, not resort to disposable cups at the gate after midnight? And part of the answer was the dishwasher is not big enough, among many answers. So for example, for this group of students, it was very frustrating that a change that they saw as meaningful in terms of like the ecological environmental impact that they would have, that the wall they hit was a dishwasher. But again, so this is some of the learnings that we had. And just to give you some example of the results we've seen so far, if you are at Bishop's, maybe you saw this email going around. So one of my groups, their climate action project was to screen a film. So this they chose. I didn't suggest for them to either have a film screening or choose that. So that was all their decisions. They decided that that's what they wanted to do. They chose the documentary. They contacted the director. They engaged with the director. They got the director to come, or the assistant director. And then they figured out everything else in terms of logistic, booking rooms, getting popcorn, and all those things. So that event is entirely a student led, and it's part of one of these climate action projects. Then the other one, this is an example of an email, and I know the print is very fine to read, but it's an instance where I also felt very proud. So this is an email conversation about instituting Meatless Monday at Bishop's University. And just to give you a bit of background, like Meatless Mondays is happening around cafeterias in the world. Like there's so many universities that are already doing Meatless Monday, and they survived. There was no demonstration by students, like nothing happened. It's happening. So they were pushing for Meatless Monday, and they were, the responses they were getting is like, oh, students would like it, we're not so sure, like So then they responded with this email saying, yeah, thank you for your answer, but actually we want to, what did they say? We appreciate, however, we would still like to suggest Meatless Monday at Bishop. So they're not taking no for an answer. And then they went on to explain why it was important. They gave like a whole list of other universities that were doing it. So they said, look, students are not going to protest, it's going to be okay. And everything that follows in those 3 paragraphs is filled with very thought out justifications, evidence, references, links, and all that. And I felt so proud. Like they showed me the email before sending it, and I said, there's like, I don't need to add even a comma, like it's perfect. And I don't know if we will have Meatless Monday tomorrow or not, but they're pushing for it. And one of the things they're doing also now with the Sustainability Office is, as the contract will have to be renewed for the organization that caters at the university cafeteria, they're going to push so that in the new contract, there's a mention of Meatless Monday. And the students continue to push for that. And this is another group who created a kiosk. I think this is one of Eco Week, or this actually happened on March 15. And they have flyers of why a plant-based diet, why it's important, what are the climate benefits, and so on. So they were educating their peers. So these are just some preliminary results, and I think it's very exciting. I feel very proud of the students. I don't know if they feel proud of themselves. We haven't had that time to kind of debrief. That will happen on the last day. But I feel very proud of what they've done. And I think by just creating the space and giving them, the space for them to lead something, they did so many things and they engaged. So I feel very, I guess, satisfied at least with some of the results so far. But I really want to know how they feel about it. And I'm sorry I don't have that answer to convey to you, but that is some of the discussions and reflection that I want to have with them, and also with the Sustainability Development Office to see how this partnership worked. And I'm coming to an end, so just maybe like a final reflection in terms of how to instill hope in our teaching. So I would say we need to balance the need to analyze and discuss problems with also the theories, practices, and example to analyze and discuss the solutions. So I think, we need to understand the problem. That's key. There, we cannot skip that. But that has to come hand in hand with things that show how others have solved the problem and examples of how this could be better. Because otherwise, if we just leave it at looking at the problem, it's not very encouraging. And I think nowadays we need to work more on showing that things are possible. Then equip students with tools that they can effectively implement in real world scenarios. So again, like methodologies, facilitation techniques, whatever things that they feel are useful to do something. So not just knowledge, but also tools, methodologies, and so on. And then inspiring students with perspectives and examples that give them hope for the future. So again, bringing in this idea of lighthouses, these positive examples or case studies that show how others solve the problem. And then create the space and condition to empower students to take action. And then that relates to the climate action project. And I think nowadays, perhaps it's more and more relevant to create spaces within our own courses where we create the conditions for the students to take action. Because as you know, we're all really busy, like with work and so many things. So if taking action is an extracurricular activity, I mean, many people do it, they're engaged in many clubs and so on, but maybe it would be nice to allow some of that class space to be about taking action. This is also part of their grade. I gave them time in class to reflect and organize themselves, and I gave them guidance. A sustainability development office gave them guidance. So we create all the structure and space and so on for them to be able to do this. And perhaps this is also showing them that they're capable. So maybe now that they tasted, this, and they saw that they're capable of doing something, maybe hopefully this will mean that down the line they'll continue to engage and take action, and maybe not be so intimidated by what it would entail to lead something, right? So I hope that this could have those sort of ramifications. So thank you, and I hope in the remainder time we can discuss and reflect more on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivian. This is wonderful. I found your examples very powerful, but I will. We have a very small group, so I think we can either raise the hands or just speak up. I think there are enough of us that we can just unmute ourselves and talk about it. But thank you. I will come last. How about that?
Hi, Vivian. I'm thrilled to finally meet you. I have a little farm right across from Bishop's called the Farmhouse, and I've been following your work. So I'm inspired by the Lighthouse concept. That's really why I wanted to be on today. So thank you so much. I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hydrant today, so I'll be processing a lot of this today. So I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for coming and supporting.
I'll just say I really loved the way that you help students not immediately jump to solutions, but take a step back and look at stakeholders and look at the horizons. I hadn't heard of the 3 horizons. I'm going to be reading a lot about that and how to think through this so that they can then put these projects into action. I think that was really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sasha, for the comment. Yeah, that type of exercise, I've had various iterations in other universities and other courses that I've led elsewhere. And it's so hard. Like every time I do this type of exercise, the first thing on day one, students already have a solution. Like they start with the solution. This is what we want to implement. And it's so hard to undo that and to say, no, we're not going to talk about that today. And you need to push that like 5 conversations, and they keep coming back. Like some of them hold more to the idea that of the solution. And the point is, and I think it's Einstein that said this, like, if he's giving an hour to work on a problem, he's going to use like 59 minutes to work on the problem and 1 minute on the solution, or whichever way he phrased it. But I think it's a little bit of that. Like, how can we really get an insight, like a deep understanding of the problem? Because sometimes we have so many blind spots and there's so many things that we're not considering. That's also why I try to bring in the systems approach to really help them like map out everything. And once they've gone through all this process, okay, what do you think are the solutions? And the students that do give themselves the opportunity to do it this way oftentimes find that the solution that they propose at the end is very different from what they were thinking at the beginning.
Just a quick question. My background is social work and mental health, and the whole eco anxiety. I don't believe that's recognized yet by in the mental health world. It's called the DSM. It's a diagnostic tool. Do you see a day where eco anxiety will be part of that mental health stream, or should it be better left out because it's maybe not part of the true mental health industry, if I could put it that way?
Yeah, no, I see your question. I do feel that that would be best posed to our colleagues in psychology and all that. I definitely do not have all the background info to answer that question. But I mean, we as a university, there's so many workshops, so many sessions and things around eco anxiety, giving students tools. So it's definitely already like informally being acknowledged as a real situation that needs to be addressed. So hopefully things will follow through from a more formal perspective, so that then, I don't know, health insurances and other more formal mechanisms can also be called into place.
If I could jump in there, we had guest speakers on this topic in my class on Monday, and they were social workers who were saying that they were not advocating that it become part of the DSM because they don't want to pathologize it. They're saying it's not an abnormal reaction. It's about reality, and we all should be this worried. So the issue is, how do we how did they phrase it? You know, how do we care for ourselves? Because was it Britt Wilson, I think, said you can't, burned out people can't save a burning planet, something like that, which is different than trying to have, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy to say, stop catastrophizing. Well, the world is ending. It is a catastrophe. So how do we stop the the crisis from happening rather than our reaction to it? What do others think?
I'm not a registered psychologist, so I can weigh in on this. I can say that what I hear at Acadia from students is that they, whether, like I always say, it doesn't matter what we call it, it matters what we do about it. That's kind of my framework. And so, I mean, you don't need to have a specific diagnosis to be able to access help. But what I love that you're doing, Vivian, is you're giving students agency. And to me, like that's the best piece of hope and of promise, is to say, you know what, yes, all of these things are happening, but I have a small slice that I feel like I can do something about. And then that builds a really neat snowball. And it also, the other piece is that it's a quiet example, right? Like just even students bringing their own mugs. I mean, we have, Acadia just got designated as a sustainable campus, and yet you see people all the time walking around with Tim Hortons cups, and it's, I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's a piece of, it's like a signal, right, to say, hey, this matters, and we care. There's a university in Florida that uses they are plastic, but they reuse them many times. They're like takeaway containers, and that's how people get their food. And you see every single person on campus who has food walking around with these particular containers. I mean, that's a pretty clear signal that, hey, I'm paying attention, and I feel like there's something I can do about it. So thank you very much for your presentation and your work and your heart.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your comment. I think, as you know, climate action is part of my title, and at first I had to do a bit of exploration, as in what does that mean, like for me to, you know, be climate action. So, and I think it's about what you say, like giving others agency and the tools and so on. I don't see like me being the one at the forefront of the demonstration with the signs, but more about how I can create an empowering space for others to feel like they can go and draw their signs and go and demonstrate or whatever. So yeah, so I do think that's personally the approach that I wanted to take. One of how I can activate students, so to say. I feel like sometimes I'm not sure to what extent they feel motivated and what could motivate them. How can I get them to participate more? So I'm just trying to create the structures. I mean, you cannot force people to do things, but you can create the structure and the conditions for them to do so if they want to. And that was kind of like the idea of the climate action project.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation and all the ideas. And I mean, you were talking about meeting with the students and sort of having this period of reflection, and I can see through, you know, some of the activities that you're doing that you're creating the space for them to reflect, you know, reflect on what they're planning and so on. But I wondered if you had other times where you're asking them to do written reflection, to really think about the process and what they're getting out of it, and potentially how that's changing their thinking and their sense of agency. And if you're not doing that, I just wondered, you know, is that something that you think would, I guess I'm wondering, you know, what sort of transference this has for students beyond your class. And I would imagine it has great transference, you know, that it's encouraging them to really think about what they can do and continue to do. But I guess in the moment, I'm wondering, how are they thinking about that? And are they writing something for you, or, you know, recording something for you that you can kind of see that change for them?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because the reflection would be more like a discussion at the end, but you're right, like a written reflection could have been also very appropriate, because, you know, it's another way for students to, you know, in their own space, in their own time, and so on, reflect on it. I have not done so, and now that you say it, that's perhaps something that I will do in the future. Most of the time in my courses, we do like a debrief at the very end at students. But yeah, but you know, like when it's all about talking in plenary, not everyone feels comfortable with sharing. So thanks for that suggestion on the written reflection. I will consider that for the future. Thank you.
And on that point on reflection, Vivian, you can actually offer it like a written thing, you know, that they have to submit to you and you only see, but you can also ask them, because they are so creative, obviously, you know, you can ask them to submit it to you like a spoken reflection, or, you know, like create an assignment which you let them choose their adventure, you know, but because you cannot you cannot limit these students, you know, they are amazing. What they are able to do is just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, the open format is so important, because you have to let everyone choose the way that works best for them, right? Like, is it written, maybe oral, whatever other possibilities there are. Yeah, that's why for the other assignment, I said, okay, it could be a presentation, because that's what everyone does, but you can do anything you want to. And I said, you could do a play, you could do a podcast, you could do, I don't know, like, and I try to give them as many options as possible. And like I showed you, one student did take the podcast idea, but in the past, in my other university, we had, for example, once a group that filmed like a short, like movie, so to say. So some students like that, and like taking those options for other formats and other ways to interact and express themselves, and so on.
One question that I had, and this comes, so my daughter is doing first year university, and she's in a class where she's doing group work, and that is not going too well for her. You know, it's going okay. You know, that's what we keep telling her. It's like, actually, this is not bad. This is a very good taste of reality, you know, for you. But how have you had any problems with, because it's group work, and of course it has to be, you know, it's marvelous. But
Yes.
have you had any issues with that part of the?
Yeah, I've had them all.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
So
yeah,
what do
I
you
think
do?
it's unavoidable. So for the Lighthouse class, I allowed them to choose their own groups. I did not do random groups. So that ended up in some amazing groups, because they chose to work with the people they wanted to, and that created some incredible synergies. But it also meant there were a few students that just ended up together because they were not in the other groups. So that group was so difficult to work with. So what I've found that works best, and I'm doing that now, is because I also don't believe in the whole group grade and there's always free riders. So I send them a peer evaluation at the end, an anonymous peer evaluation where they have to grade themselves or rate themselves in terms of a variety of things, like, did I participate? Did I go to all meetings? Did I do? And they have to rate themselves and their teammates. So if there's some issue, it comes up, and if it's like salient or strong enough, I will individualize the grade of the student that did not show up, because that's not fair that that student will get an A because the other students did all the work. So I'm moving towards that, towards not doing group grades if there's someone who clearly was not participating. Also, I try to make them meet with me. So I say, by certain date, you have to meet with me, you have to talk to me. With the Lighthouse project, what also worked is that they had this mini deliverable. So that was forcing them to keep connected, which I did not do for the climate action. So for some groups, I lost touch I had no idea what they were doing. So that I will change. I think it's good to break that down, those things, especially if they're semester long, into mini deliverables and mini milestones, because that helps them keep working and not lose the pace. And also, sooner than later if things are not working. But I think it's unavoidable. There will always be a group that doesn't work well for whatever issue. And then, of course, I try to help them as best as I can. But I don't know if anyone has solutions or best practices for that.
So we have 3 more minutes if anyone would like to make a comment or a question.
Quickly, where's your future research going to take you in the Lighthouse concept?
Yeah, so we're moving forward in the Quebec region. So that's where I'm focusing. So with the students that I showed you last semester, we started interviewing. This semester, we're interviewing more. I recruited a postdoc. I'm going to recruit a master's student. So we're hoping to do, it's impossible, of course, to interview everyone that we would like to. So we will only be able to interview a subset of these amazing farmers. We're also moving to doing workshops at some point in the fall semester, because one of the things we want to do is bring different stakeholders together, like people who normally don't meet. Like, for example, I was in a farmers meeting not long ago, but it was all farmers. Sometimes it's all academics or all whatever. So the idea, I want to break those silos and create a space where these people can meet, interact, and have some sort of guided methodology to discuss through the problems, potential solutions. So that we're moving towards the fall semester. I'm preparing an event that's called the First Supper, and maybe stay tuned to hear about it. But it would be like the first supper of our new world. And there I'm trying to grab some of these key actors and start some discussions for what needs to change and how can we better align policies and actions to support what needs to be supported, so we can encourage and amplify those lighthouse farmers that are doing such great work in feeding us healthy food in ways that don't damage the environment and so on. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, but that's how the work is moving. So it's definitely moving and the team is growing and I'm very excited.